Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. And it's holiday time, it's high summer, and tonight we've got a 60-minute programme to celebrate that fact. And wherever you are, whatever you do, the best way of enjoying this time of year is simply to get outside into the garden. At this time of year, salvias are one of the stars of the garden, and with such a wide variety, there's bound to be one that catches your eye. I like to think that I know my onions, but actually my crop has turned into a bit of a disaster. Joe is heading off to Newby Hall to marvel at one of the most amazing borders in Europe.
Each side is 140 metres long, so in total we've got 280 metres of herbaceous planting. Now that's a lot of plants.
We find out from the curator at RHS Wisley the perfect way to prune wisteria. And Carol is at her home with ideas for freshening up our borders to keep them looking fantastic for the rest of the summer. Then she's off to the big city to discover some hidden gardens for you to visit, all just for the price of a travel card.
The whole thing is so carefully conceived, and yet it's a place to lose yourself.
Now the dry garden is happily baking away in the summer sunshine. And that's good for a lot of the plants that are here, but none more so than bearded irises. But of course they've done their thing. They're long gone. You can see I've got a clump of them here with these lovely glaucous leaves, because they are one of the most spectacular spring flowers. I love them. I love the voluptuousness and the intensity of colour, that where the rest of spring is slowly and charmingly easing into the year, these just flower out with incredible passion. But they're getting a bit congested, and now is a really good time to lift irises, divide them and replant them, and that way they'll flower much better next year. And this is very, very stony, dry soil, and they're completely happy in it. So if you're planting bearded irises, give them as much sunshine as you can, and don't worry about rich soil. Drainage is the key thing. Irises have a big rhizome, which stores the goodness, but underneath that are the roots. So when you lift them, you want to make sure you don't damage the roots. There we go, right. Let's pull that out. Right, there we go. That's a good clump of irises, and we can break that up and make new plants. People think of the rhizomes as the roots. They're not. The roots are underneath. So if I get my knife, and actually this is coming off now in my hand. Right, there's a good plant. We can see it's got healthy leaves, it's young, it's got good swollen rhizomes, and then the roots underneath coming down. That's a nice new plant. That clump has given me 13 separate plants. Enough for 3 new vigorous groups, or clumps, but before that I must find a space to put them. Now the dry garden deliberately is allowed to fill itself up with self-seeded plants. Now one of the side effects of letting things seed themselves, which we do willingly, is that occasionally something takes over and dominates everything else. And this year it's honesty, which is a lovely plant, and I want it in this border, but not quite to the extent that we've got it. And this area here is perfect for putting in the iris. And this is a really good time of year for editing your beds. You can see the size, the shape, and the colour of what you'd like them to be. And yet actually, a lot of plants will move surprisingly easily. Get a bucket. I can move these. I don't need to throw them away. I can just rehouse them. There you go. Put the that in there. And if you haven't got anywhere to put plants, of course you can give them to friends, you can take them to a car boot sale, you can give them to charity. Don't just consign them to the compost heap automatically. Right, that's given me a nice space, which I can immediately fill with my irises. And I want to position these so that this rhizome gets as much sunshine as possible. So they want to be facing that way. There's south, so the sun will hit them all day. And if I put that in there like that, I'm just burying the roots, but keeping the rhizome above ground, like that. Now, one of the things that you'll notice, if you do that, there's hardly any anchorage at all. And the weight of the leaves is already leaning that back. So it's a good idea to cut the leaves back, right back like that. That also means that these roots that have been ripped up out the ground, however carefully you've dug them, and are damaged, have less to do. And then you get that harmony of the leaves feeding the rhizomes and the roots feeding the leaves, and the plant will get its own balance. Now this is a job that is a good idea to get on with, because you can do it as early as the beginning of July. And now we're getting into August, is something that if you get it in the ground, it gives them a decent enough time to develop new roots before winter comes. The garden is pretty much as good as it's going to get at this time of the year. And I think the most important thing to do is just enjoy it. There's not a lot you can do to change things anyway. But what you can do is important. And I love that fingertip approach that's necessary now, rather than the big hands-on stuff that is appropriate at other times of the year. And it's just that kind of gardening that Carol has been doing down at Glebe Cottage.
It's at this time of year that the garden's at its peak. Everything's burgeoning, flowers are looking wonderful. Well, at the moment, this border's having a bit of a lull. It's been magnificent with geraniums, and it's going to be again with all these asters and phlox to take over. But at the moment, the plant that your eye immediately goes to is this Veronicastrum. It's magnificent, but even its performance is being marred slightly by the presence of all these Seacium heads. This has been beautiful, this big crimson thistle, but right now it's rather tatty. And people would say, well, you know, it's a thistle. Why don't you just leave those seed heads? The birds will come and feast on them, but they won't, because there's no seed in there. And what's more, on wet days, the whole thing looks positively soggy. So what I want to do is take these stems down right to the ground. There's no point faffing about taking bits off here and there, because that stem has finished flowering. So if I take decisive action and cut it right back to the ground and just get rid of it, that's going to mean that this plant will put all its energy into producing some new flower stems, which with a bit of luck should start to appear in September or so. It's also, you can shear the foliage if you want to as well, but I think that just cutting these stems is all that's needed right now. And if you think that's drastic, wait till you see what I'm going to do to these poppies. Now, these are oriental poppies, and they've been beautiful, great big opulent blooms. But I'm not just going to cut those flower stems down. I'm going to take my shears and I'm going to shear the lot right to the ground. Everything. Old foliage, tatty new foliage, the flower stems, everything. Just absolutely straight across there. And within a matter of weeks, this poppy is going to rise like a phoenix from the ground. There'll be a whole brand new set of leaves, lovely fresh foliage, which is going to fill this rather big gap. And that's quite a lot of herbage, but I mean, this is never going to look good, but this will. Some water, possibly a little bit of feed, and the whole thing will be as good as new, freshened up for the rest of the summer. Helping other plants maintain their performance needn't be so brutal. Many plants, especially those with a branching habit, like cosmos, or those who carry their blooms in trusses, like many roses, can make fresh displays for months. Deadheading is all important. Removing spent flowers means plants devote all their energy into flower production. What's more, the fresh new flowers are unmarred by anything dead or dying. All over this yellow and blue garden I indulge myself in daylilies, and this latest one to open is Hyperion, and I love the yellow ones because all of them have got gorgeous scent, but I don't need any tools for this at all. Just to make these look pristine, just break these dead flowers gently. They almost sort of fall off. And I don't want to nip into that flower head because I think that's ugly. I think that structure there is just so beautiful with these new buds coming on too. And this is part of it really, where those spent flowers have been. So I'll just go over the whole thing. And it is the sort of job you need to do daily because they're what they say they are. You know, each flower only lasts for a day. But to appreciate those green buds and these big open lemon trumpets, what a difference it makes just to clean these old flowers off. Whilst you're on the garden housekeeping mission, attending to a few little jobs can make a big difference. Trim off the brown flowers from Alchemilla mollis to leave the beautiful lime green froth behind. If you don't want them to seed everywhere, then take the shears to them later when all the flowers have faded. Simply removing any dead stems freshens up the whole picture, and it gives up and coming plants a real opportunity to shine. These borders are looking a bit more spruce now. There's still plenty to do. But the Astrantia roma that was standing in pots all along this path, I've decided to take out and replace it with this lovely little Viola cornuteralba. It's a charming plant, this, and just from one plant I managed to make loads of them. And they'll go on flowering for ages and ages and bring a real bit of sparkle to the border. There's still so much happening here. I mean, the acanthus is just majestic at the moment. But I think putting these little white violas all along the path is going to move this whole border into the next phase.
Right. This is all destined for the compost heap. And what you have is a typical mix of the sort of thing that any garden's going to get, which is sort of fairly dry material, which is quite hard and almost woody, and then leaves that are tough, mixed up with very, very wet grass. I mean, look at that. You can squeeze the moisture out of that. In fact, let me show you what the compost is like that we finished with here. This is the final bay. This heap has been made up from the compost that we've accumulated since Easter. And you can see that that's nice. It's good to handle. So I want to turn this barrow load into that nice compost as quickly as I can. And the absolute central secret of making compost is to turn it. I need to get in there and get dirty. quite important when you do this, just to let some air get into it, to throw it up. You can see the steam that's coming out. And that heat, it's an incredible furnace of animal activity, converting dying life into this rich, vital material. I'll tell you, this garden absolutely depends on its fertility and its health on good compost. I always feel that any gardener that finds the need to go to a gym is probably not turning their compost enough, because it's hard work. There you are, it didn't take long. Nice little bit of exercise. Now, if that looks like too much work and not worth the result, just bear two things in mind. One, you don't have to do it on this scale. You can make it in a dustbin. Just empty the dustbin out, just tip the dustbin over and put it back in, and you're doing exactly the same of what I've done here. And two, turning it dramatically speeds up the process. You could have as lovely, rich, sweet-smelling compost by the autumn. That is the secret of making really good compost. Onions, or at least the edible allium family, are amongst the oldest of all crops grown by man, and certainly one of the most universal. There's not a society in this world that doesn't grow an onion if they can, and they're pretty easy to grow. And the ones that I've got here, which are shallots, garlics, onions, are doing very well, but I want to plant out some more, which are leeks. And if you've got leeks, it's worth getting on with it, because we're getting to the end of the leek planting season. So I'm going to prepare this piece of ground to put them in. By the way, this rake has got a double front to it. I've only had it this year, and it's very good. It's called a hand harrow, and I can thoroughly recommend it. I've grown my leek seedlings in pots and in plugs, although traditionally they were always grown on a seedbed outside, and you can do that very well. This is a variety called Caratan, and I'm going to plant these in the traditional method, which is to use a dibber. Just make a hole at about 6-inch spacing along a line or a board. Now, inevitably the hole backfills a little, but that doesn't matter too much in the first instant. You take your leek seedlings, and you can see these have got good roots. Break them open and put a seedling in each hole. There you are. Nice, good root system, healthy young plant. But obviously a leek will grow to really quite a monstrous size, so they don't have to eat them. When you put them in the hole, just pop them in, swizzle them round, and leave them in. Don't backfill them. Now, this way is certainly the best technique if you want nice big leeks, because they grow to expand out into the hole. And because they're in the hole and underground, they blanch them. So you get a good white stem, which is sweeter. And then when you plant them, instead of firming round and getting the soil up around the necks, you simply water them in. So much for the conventional method. And I could fill the whole of this space with leeks like that. But actually there's another way of growing them, and I tend to use this method much more, which is to grow them in root trainers or deep plugs like this, and then plant the whole caboodle out in one go. And just make a hole and pop it in. And the reason for that is that nobody ever eats just one leek. You dig up 2, 3, 4 more. So if you have a clump growing together, you dig up the clump. And that's it. Very easy, you just take what you need as you go along. And these I plant with a trowel and just pop them in the ground as normal. Both techniques have the pros and cons. Individual holes, you get a bigger leek. If you plant them in groups, there's less handling. They both taste just as good. And they'll be ready to eat from autumn right through the winter into next spring. However, I've got other alliums which are ready to harvest right now. You know the garlic is ready to harvest when the leaves turn yellow, and also when it starts to set seed. You can see here that every stem is setting a flower bud. Now we could cut those off if the leaves were perfectly green and flush, but they're not. And the signs are that whatever is underground won't get any better. And to be honest, I don't know what this crop is going to be like. But there's only one way of finding out, and that's to dig it up. And the key to harvesting garlic is to dig it, don't pull it. Because if you pull it, you risk damaging the roots. And there we go. There's our bulb underground, two together. And I want to keep as many of those roots intact as possible, because if I break the plate where they touch the bulb, they won't store nearly so well. Let's put that down. They're not huge, but the critical thing is that they have formed into separate cloves. Sometimes you'll find that bulbs will be solid. There'll just be one large clove. And usually that's because they've gone in the ground too late. They haven't had enough cold weather. There's two there. Now to store these, I want to dry them as thoroughly as possible. The best place to dry garlic is on the soil where they're grown. And if it's a really sunny week, that's the easiest way to do it. But if there's any risk of rain, it's worth bringing them in under cover. If you've got a greenhouse, that's really good. And makes the greenhouse smell beautifully garlicky. Otherwise, put them on racks indoors. Shallots, onions, they're looking good. They'll be ready in a few weeks. Garlic, very happy with. Leeks in the ground. So far, everything rosy in the onion garden. Except if you come down to the ornamental veg garden, things are not looking so good. These are the same onions grown at the same time in the same way as the ones in the top vegetable garden. And they are a complete disaster. And the problem is actually in the soil. This is onion white rot. And you can see that it completely inhibits the growth of the onions. In fact, the onions themselves are perfectly edible as long as they're firm. And if I dig up some shallots, I just reach in as if I take these here, see they come out of the ground, the roots are completely rotted away. There, you can see in that one, it's very clear. There's a white fungus. And that's at the base of the bulb where the roots join the plate. And the roots rot, and because the roots rot, the top growth rots back and dies back, and therefore the bulb can't grow. And if I cut that in two, without cutting my fingers off, you'll see that it's completely healthy. You can eat that, no problem at all. Just cut out any obvious fungus and it won't do you any harm. Now it's clearly really bad news. This is not good. It means that I can't grow garlic, onions, shallots or leeks in the whole of this vegetable garden. The good news is that alliums are the only plants to be affected. So I can grow anything else in this plot, and that's what I'll do. I'll clear this, keep the bulbs that I can eat and use them up, burn the rest of the material rather than compost it, and plant it up and try and make the best of a bad situation. So the first thing to do is just clear these away. I've got two containers, one for those onions and shallots that I can eat, and one for the rubbish, like that. I need to keep this bed onion-free for at least 5 years. But the good news is there are plenty of other things that I can plant straight away in the bed. kale, spring cabbage, any of the lettuces or French beans will all go well. I'll just freshen it up with a little compost before planting. Well, all these little bits and pieces I'll burn, but we'll eat all those. Now, this kind of job is hardly glamorous, but it has to be done. But Joe has got himself a really good gig this week. He's visiting Newby Hall, and I know it's good because I've been there.
Something of a landmark here at Newby are these huge herbaceous borders. They're the longest in Europe. Each side is 140 metres long, so in total we've got 280 metres of herbaceous planting. Now that's a lot of plants. They were first laid out in the 1930s by Major Compton. The formal yew hedges both enclose the long vista and act as a windbreak to create the ideal conditions for all these herbaceous plants to thrive. This is a classic herbaceous border, the way it's been planted in blocks, all looking like the plants are holding each other up in a way. But there's some very exciting plant combinations too. Got Geranium Patricia here spilling over the path. This vertical accent of this loose stripe spiking its way through there. And then we move into the more sort of gold colours, the oranges, daylily at the front, heleniums, and then tearing up to the eupatorium at the back, which looks like it's holding itself up. But actually, there's some really clever black netting being staked all the way through the back of this border, where the taller plants have grown through it and are now being supported. And right now, in late July, they look particularly splendid, pretty much as perfect as herbaceous borders can be. Well, you'd think so anyway, but actually, their days are numbered. Come this autumn, a major restoration project gets underway that will see these borders change dramatically. Mark Jackson, head gardener, has been here for 20 years. Now, the big question, not only on my list, but surely on all the visitors to this garden, is why? Why do you want to rip up these beautiful borders and start all over again? They look amazing.
All borders need renovation to some degree or other, lifting and dividing. And
yeah, nothing stands still, obviously, in a garden.
Exactly, and many of the plants are at that stage where there's quite a lot of work required.
Yeah.
There's also an aspirational side, if you like. We believe we can make this border even better than it is now. And then also there's a personal side. This is a family home, and we have a new generation, and
They want to stamp their mark?
We will do, yes.
How different are the new borders going to be to what we see here?
We want to bring a slightly more modern feel to it without going too far. There will certainly be certain colours that may disappear out, and that will allow new introductions. There's so many good plants
Which ones?
out
Come
there.
on, you can tell me. Which are going?
The Geum Princess Juliana is probably one that we're going to lose, and we'll be moving down into
Princess
the tropical
Juliana's
area.
gone.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, no oranges.
The Achillea filipendulina, the gold plate,
Yeah.
we will probably take out as well.
Okay.
And we will
no oranges, no yellows.
We will use yellows, but softer yellows.
Is it more of a naturalistic feel that you're aiming for then? A more sort of muted, more natural colours, nothing too garish?
I think it will soften to some degree. The Polymonium Sonnius bluebell, which is a Carol Klein plant.
That's going to stay?
He's safe, that's a definite.
Carol, you're all right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's one of your favourites, Polymonium.
Yeah, yeah. At the moment, it is daunting, it's challenging. I'm a little apprehensive. We're sticking our heads above a parapet, and if we get it wrong, both the family and the visitors will let us know.
But of course, gardeners are really just custodians of a piece of land for a certain amount of time. And those borders are going to take years to develop to get them looking really mature. But in here, there's a garden that changes year on year. Here at Newby Hall, they call it the Autumn Garden. But right now, it's a salvia collection that's stealing the show. the salvias are loving the protected microclimate within this wall garden here.
Yes,
loads of colour and loads more to come right through the autumn.
Yeah, you're right.
How many have you packed into this small space?
There are 40 varieties, 45 varieties of salvia. There's been about 1,000 plants planted in the garden
Wow.
this year.
And do you replant the whole garden every year?
We do it every year. We can't run the risk of them not being hardy enough to come through the winter.
So it's almost like a sort of bedding scheme, really.
It is like a bedding scheme.
Do you come up with a plan? How do you go about planting it all out?
I don't come up with a plan, well, not on paper. I come up with a plan in my head, and you look at the colour associations. I know what they look like. I know how tall they're going to grow. So it's all up here. It's all up here.
Well, it certainly works because they do partner each other very well, don't they? And they look really nice with the variations in height and colour. Now, if you don't have all this space and you can't grow 45 different varieties of salvias, which ones would you recommend? Ones that you couldn't live without? Show me the good ones. Wow, this has got an incredible colour, hasn't it? It's so intense.
Yeah, I mean, that's Salvia microphila ceropatosi, which is such a vibrant, vibrant pink.
It's a really good height as well, actually.
Yeah, it is. It's a good height, good colour. One of my favourites.
It's got a scented foliage.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I like that. I suppose it's not to everybody's taste, but I like it.
You get used to it when you're working with them all the time.
Some really good blues, aren't there?
Yeah, we've got the Salvia uliginosa, which will grow up to 5 to 6 feet. It's a really good back of the border plant. You can use it a bit like Verbena bonariensis, where you can grow plants around it and through it. You can see through it.
Because there's one called Newby Hall,
Yeah,
isn't there?
there's
as
Newby
well?
Hall's just round this corner. I mean, it's not quite such a bright red, but it was bred by Jamie Compton, so we feel we ought to grow it.
What's this blue one?
Well, the blue one, we're not quite sure what it is, but it is too good a colour for us not to be growing it.
Fair enough.
We will
Fair
find out
enough.
what it's called eventually.
Yeah, I caught you out there, didn't
Yes,
I,
oh
with that
yes,
one?
yes.
If you think you can help Ian out and name this mystery salvia, the Newby Hall gardeners can be contacted via our website.
Now, I'm clearing away poppies from these borders. Not all of them by any means, not least because the poppy heads themselves are so architecturally beautiful. And I want to keep those right into winter, and then the birds eventually will eat them and the seeds will drop, and that will stimulate new growth. And some I've marked. You can see that I've marked with a piece of string because the colours are particularly good, and we'll harvest those seeds. But I want a bit of space, and by pulling them up, that's exactly what I get. And at first, it looks a bit empty and chaotic. But in any border, and certainly in midsummer, an empty space is an opportunity for a new plant, particularly the plants that respond to warmth, those that come from near the tropics. And I've been raising them in the greenhouse and the cold frames. And just as at Newby Hall, one of my absolute favourites are salvias. Whole mass of salvias, but a few of them work particularly well in the dual garden. And in fact, there's one that I've had for ages that I want to show you. I've treasured this Salvia garanetica for over 15 years now. I do renew it by taking cuttings every summer. But I know the thought of taking cuttings sometimes puts people off, but in fact it's incredibly easy. Salvias, what you're looking for is side shoots. If you grow tomatoes, you're very familiar with the side shoots that you pinch out. And you can see on this plant here, there's a side shoot. Between the leaf and the stem, a shoot growing off at about 50, 60 degrees. And that, as long as it doesn't have a flower on the end, will make a really good cutting. So I'll just snip that off. There. So I'll pop that straight in the bag. And the bag just simply conserves the moisture, stops it drying out too fast. I'll take another one more about it. And actually, I saw yet another one. So if I snip in there at the base, like that, we'll put that in. This is a really good time of year to take salvia cuttings. Now the next couple of months, because it'll be producing lots of these side shoots, they'll root easily, the plant will get established, you can then overwinter it, and next spring you'll have good strong plants ready to go in the garden after the last frost, and you're away. That will then produce more material, and you'll never need to buy that salvia again, and you can have dozens of them. Now the whole process is really simple, but there are one or two things that you need to remember. The first is to use a compost that is very free draining. I've got some mixed up here with lots of grit, but if in any doubt at all, just add more grit. I'll just do one at a time. Now if I left all those leaves on, they would lose moisture quicker than they could develop roots to feed it back again. So the first thing to do is to take the leaves off, and this is where a sharp knife is very useful. We cut that cleanly there, and there. And I'm going to leave just 2 leaves, and that's a pretty good rule of thumb for all cuttings. So we've got 2 leaves like that. Now, these are nodes where the leaves join. With salvias, you can take internodal cuttings, which basically means cut them anywhere. So I'm just going to do a nice clean cut like that. We've got a clean end. Cuttings seem to take much more readily if they go between the pot and the soil rather than directly into the soil. So just ease it in, don't force it because we don't want to damage that cut end, which is where the roots are going to come from. Now where we have leaves like that, actually those 2 big leaves could come off. So we've got a clean end there, put that one in over here. And this is it, there's no magic. I'm not using years and years of experience or skill. Anybody could do this. Take that off there, and I think we'll lose that leaf, and that leaf. And actually what we'll do is we'll reduce the size of those. So if you think there's too much foliage, just cut that in half, and that in half, and that means it will lose less moisture. That's all we're doing. Cut that there. Push that in. Right, the next stage is to water that thoroughly and put it somewhere which is not in direct sunlight, because it might get too dry, but with sunshine. Plenty of light, but sun protection, and to keep it fairly moist. Now, it doesn't mean soaking it with a watering can, it just means the air wants to be quite moist. A number of ways of doing that. You can either put a polythene bag around it. The danger of that is you can have too much moisture and too much condensation, but it's very useful if you're going away. Or you can simply just mist it with a mister 2 or 3 times a day, and that will be completely adequate, and that will take. As it is, I put all my cuttings in the greenhouse. These cuttings that I took in spring will make a really good show in this space. Now, Salvia garanetica does like fairly rich, heavy soil. Most salvias like good drainage, but as long as they get full sun, there are very few soils that they won't grow in. And if you plant in groups, and odd numbers tend to look more natural, immediately you can use small plants to create a big impression, and you can get a big impact in the border. And if you've got the plants, you can do it with 11 or 13, and it's really dramatic, yet it all comes from little cuttings. Now, as well as Salvia garanetica, there are dozens of other beautiful salvias, and here are a few that you could grow at home. Cambridge Blue is one of my favourites. The flowers are an incredible colour, and it looks just as good either in a pot or in a border. Indigo Spires is rather taller, reaching about 4 to 5 foot, and will flower constantly from June to November. Salvia oxyphora can take a bit of tracking down, but it is worth the effort because its crimson furry flowers are beautifully scented and irresistible for insects. Still to come, Carol is visiting gardens in central London, where she's found some real gems. And the best thing is that they are all free. And here at Longmeadow, I'll be tasting my first tomato of the season. Now, I get a lot of letters asking about pruning in general, and a surprising amount of them are about pruning wisteria specifically. I've got a batch of emails at the moment where wisteria always seems to cause problems in some form or other. For example, Denise Soden, you've written and said that you have a white wisteria, at least you think it's going to be white, which you bought and has grown perfectly well for the last 4 years, but it's never flowered. So is there anything you can do to encourage it to flower? And Jim Nuttall, you've written saying you have an amethyst wisteria and it's flowered from day one. Problem is, you don't know how to prune it. So we thought we'd go to RHS Wisley and find the best way to prune wisteria to get maximum flowering. And who better to tell us that than the top man, the curator, Colin Crosby.
Wisterias are one of the most wonderful and beautiful of all flowering climbers. I love them because they've got masses of flowers for a short period of time in the spring, and then the scent is just to die for. They're truly, truly magnificent. Wisterias are a member of the pea family and they originate from Japan and China. They grow really well in our gardens. However, for some gardeners, they can be quite frustrating. One of the most frequently asked questions we have in Wisley Garden is how do you prune wisterias to encourage flowering? It's actually very simple and happens in 2 stages. The first stage is the summer pruning to remove all these long, vigorous growths that you see at the present moment. What you have to do is actually count 6 buds from where the old wood is, and that's where you make your cut. Now, it sounds very harsh, but it's not. So in I'm counting 6 buds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then pruning. And this actually helps to encourage the flower bud initiation. Now, this is a job that you might need to do 2 or 3 times during the summer months, because all the shoots that you've pruned, they won't regrow, but you might find other shoots that suddenly start growing. So 2 or 3 times during the summer, whenever you see these long leggy growths, just give it a haircut, pruning back to the 6 buds. With the pruning, I always start at the bottom and work my way to the top of the plant. And once you've finished the summer pruning, then the next stage of the pruning is to come back in late January, early February time, and all these little spurs of branches that you've pruned back to 6 buds, you then prune back to 2 buds. So in January, February time, you come back to 2 buds. They'll be really fat and juicy, and that's them swelling up as flower buds. Now, most people are used to seeing wisterias growing against walls and up houses. However, in small gardens, you can train them up a wooden post, and this gives you a standard wisteria. Wonderful when it's covered in flowers, and it's treated and pruned in exactly the same way. Now, if you really want to encourage your wisteria to flower well, you feed it with a high potash fertiliser during the summer months because this encourages flowers. You don't want to use a nitrogen fertiliser because this will just give you lots of long, fleshy growth. It's important when choosing a wisteria that you go for a named plant which has been grafted. The graft is very obvious at the bottom of the plant. Sometimes you will still see a little bit of the rubber tape round about it. These are more likely to flower from a younger age in the garden. Unnamed or seedling varieties of wisteria, you could wait sometimes 20 years until they flower.
Now, I confess I've been itching to pick some of these tomatoes over the last week, but I've left them just so we can celebrate doing the first harvest. And they are ready. And these are part of the grafted tomatoes that I grew as a trial. Planted these out. And we've got some grafted and some non-grafted from the same varieties. So as well as seeing how they're growing, I want to see how they taste too. This is a variety called Conchita. This one here, which is grafted, and then this one, which is non-grafted, noticeably thinner, but the same sort of height and seems to have the same amount of fruit. So superficially, there's no real noticeable difference at this stage in the year between grafted and non-grafted. So I suppose the important thing is to do the taste test. So if I pick one here from a grafted fruit, and we've got a non-grafted in my right hand. Now these are both Conchita. To look at, you can see no difference whatsoever. So let's have a bite into the grafted. Juicy. Well, the first thing I'd say is that a tomato eaten warm in the greenhouse, straight off the vine, fantastic. You should never chill tomatoes. That tastes really good. Okay, now the non-grafted. That's ungrafted, and it's slightly less sweet, slightly more acidic. Now actually it's got a little bit more flavour, but a little bit more tartness with it. Now, clearly this is a matter of personal taste. Now it could just be that the grafted one is a little bit further ahead. Now really what you've got to consider is we paid $9.99 for 3 grafted plants. $9.99 would buy you 3 packets of seed, which would give you a minimum of 30 plants. I have to say, in my opinion, there's not 10 times the difference. In other words, it's not worth it. But it's lovely. They're both lovely.
Picking your own produce is always deeply satisfying. And these tomatoes, despite coming in every shape and size, will taste delicious. Summer breeze, all in my mind. Whilst at this time of year there is so much to enjoy in our own gardens, it's also the perfect time to get out and visit others. And Carol has been doing just that, and she's chosen the unlikely destination of central London.
In London, the parks and gardens are a green refuge from the stress and clamour of the city streets. But for the keen gardener who wants to do more than find somewhere to eat their sandwiches, where should they go? First stop, Regent's Park. These formal bedding schemes in Regent's Park really do represent the pinnacle of this kind of art. Even at the height of the popularity of such schemes during the Victorian era, these would have won accolade after accolade. And you know, whatever your taste in horticulture, when you see something done with this amount of finesse and magnificence, you just have to admit, it's brilliant. Also in Regent's Park is the Garden of St John's Lodge, sometimes known as the Secret Garden. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you where it is, but I'll give you a clue. Head for the park's inner circle. The house is private, but since 1994, the garden's been open to the public. It's laid out in line with the lodge and has all the elements you'd associate with a quintessential English formal garden. Strong geometry contrasts with soft planting. Clipped hedges, arches and paths lead the eye to benches and statues. Over in Hyde Park, near to Knightsbridge Tube Station, is one of the city's newest and most temporary gardens. And it couldn't be more of a contrast. This black monolith is the Serpentine Gallery's new pavilion, designed by Swiss architect Peter Zumthor. Inside, shielded by a corridor, is a courtyard. And in the centre, a garden designed by the renowned Piet Oudolf. In previous years, this pavilion space has been used as an opportunity by architects to display their talents, to show what they can do. But this year, it's a bit different. It's very much a collaboration between the architect and the gardener. It's wonderfully successful. As soon as you come in here, this great black structure separates you from the outside world. And the garden itself it's such an entity. It's a painting. The colour palette here is restrained. It's simple. And the darkness of the whole structure is picked up in the stems of the eupatorium and the bracts of these glorious monadas. The whole thing is so carefully conceived, and yet it's a place to lose yourself. It's a different sort of reality. If the pavilion is as modern as can be, my next destination positively oozes history. A short walk from Monument Tube is the church of St Dunstan's in the east. It was bombed during the Blitz, with only the tower and a few walls surviving. In the 1960s, it was decided not to rebuild it, but to open it as a garden. Today, hydrangeas and ornamental vines clothe the walls, while figs, ferns and magnolias grow around the nave. The juxtaposition of growth and decay makes for the most atmospheric of spaces. Near Temple Tube Station is the Inner Temple, where hundreds of barristers have their chambers. Tucked in one corner is a very surprising courtyard. In an enclosed space like this, what would you expect to find? Formality, tradition, box balls perhaps, and straight lines. But not a bit of it. Instead of that, you're greeted by this incredibly modern garden, where a few simple plants are allowed to be themselves, seed themselves, and head for the sky. It's a daring solution to challenges lots of city gardeners face. Low rainfall, bright sun bouncing off the buildings, and poor soil. I love it. But the main attraction at the Inner Temple is its 3-acre garden. Down on the lawn are some beautiful old trees. London planes, mulberries, and one of my favourites, this stunning catalpa. At the top of the garden are new borders, island beds, brimming with annuals, and some of the best you're likely to see anywhere. The planting is soft, romantic, feminine, and yet completely original. It has this dreamlike quality in complete contrast to the solidity of the buildings that surround it. And it's not just barristers who can enjoy this beautiful place, it's you and me too. If you're planning a visit to London, the Inner Temple Gardens are open to the public weekdays only, between 12 and 3, but may be closed for special events. Regent's Park and St Dunstan's are open all year, though St Dunstan's is closed for 3 days over Christmas. Finally, the Serpentine Pavilion will be in Hyde Park until the 16th of October, and it's open every day from 10 until 6.
Here are some other gardens outside London that are also free. The Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh is world-renowned for its vast collection of plants, and with over 70 acres of garden to explore, there is always something to see. Sheffield Botanic Gardens are well worth a visit too, and their borders look amazing at this time of year. And if you're on holiday down in Devon, why not call in at the University of Exeter? Streatham campus is an unexpected treat. For more details, go to our website.
Have a look at this. You know how often when you buy parsley or any other herb in a pot, if you look at it carefully, you see it's lots of little seedlings, none of which are very big. But if you grow it yourself, this is what it should be like. It should be a big plant, and if you rummage in there, you can see the individual plants are really quite substantial. And they'll have a deep taproot. It's a member of the carrot family, and it wants to be substantial. And the advantage of that is you can make lots of cuttings and it grows back. It will last for months and months. And you can be generous with it. You can take yourself a really decent clump of parsley. You can make pesto with it, you can do all sorts, and it looks lovely. Now is a really good time to sow parsley, and if you plant it out in September, that will last all winter into next spring.
And there are lots of other jobs that we can be getting on with this weekend. Now is the best time to make new strawberry plants from old. They're throwing out runners very vigorously, and if you follow the runner from the parent, you come to a plantlet. Peg this first plantlet down. You can either do this over the soil or fill a pot with compost and peg it onto the compost. After about 3 weeks, this will have developed vigorous roots of its own, and it can be cut free from the parent and provide you with a new plant to replenish your stock. With the warm, wet weather, weeds are growing really fast. And to keep your paths clear, you can use the traditional old knife method. This is thorough but time-consuming. Strimming has an instant effect and is quicker, but the weeds also return quickly. Or there's my favourite method. Burning will kill the top growth, weaken the roots, and keep the weeds at bay for a month or more.
Dahlias are starting to look magnificent, but unfortunately earwigs think they taste rather good too. The best way to deter them is to provide a resting place for the earwigs during the day because they're nocturnal. If you set up an upside down pot on a bamboo cane and fill the pot with straw, the earwigs will go in at dawn, and then you can come along and remove them along with the straw and take them as far away from your dahlias as possible. But don't kill them because they do a lot of good, particularly eating aphids. Hopefully that will prove irresistible to any passing earwigs. And that's it for tonight's programme. I'm afraid we shan't be back next week because it's the athletics, but join me here at Longmeadow in 2 weeks' time at the normal hour of 8:30. And until then, goodbye.